Hello guys, welcome back to our channel and welcome back for another lecture in the subject matter Introduction to Criminology. For today's lecture is a result of the recent event that we are currently encountering nowadays, especially things that involves the criminality in our country. The past day I posted a community poll on this channel with the question if you agree that death penalty has the capacity to deter criminality, not only in our area but also in other countries and so on. So we actually received 32 responses, and if we're going to look into the result, it seems 72% of the responses that we received voted for yes. They agree that death penalty has the capacity or can be able to reduce the numbers of crimes and reduce the percentage of criminality in our area, and only 28% voted for no. I posted this question because of the two sensational cases that shocked our nation recently, and those cases are the case of police officer Nuesca and the recent is the case of the Desera case. This, I do believe everyone knows what cases was I'm talking about, since it's all over the news. And apparently, because of these two cases, the call for the reimposition of death penalty once again is being brought into the attention of the community. So with regards to this, let's talk about the historical background of the death penalty. So death penalty usually is being used blindly in the early days, where in all cases or majority of crime being committed are being punished with death penalty. So regardless of the nature of the crime, whether that's very simple petty crimes, we call them the petty crimes, or a very serious crime, they are sometimes being punished with death, irrespective of the gravity and seriousness of the crime that they are committing. So usually, if the crime is being done against the ruling government, or usually if it's a violation against the king, they are usually punished by death. So that has been the observation of criminologists even before, wherein the imposition of death penalty has no scientific basis. I mean, there is no scientific principle behind it. Like, everything, as long as they wanted to punish that with death, they will punish that with death. Even in the Bible, we notice that the death penalty is also being practiced. Like, for example, we have cases or we have stories in the Bible wherein somebody is being punished with death through stoning or stoning to death, which is an ancient form of punishment that, of course, will produce death as a result. We have also crucifixion. We have also beheading and many other types of death penalty being imposed that can be also observed in the biblical setting. Okay? So in the field of criminology, we usually talk about death penalty as a form of punishment and as a form of deterrence. So we stated that death penalty usually before is being applied regardless of or irrespective of the seriousness of the crime that are being committed. Thankfully, we have one criminologist, Italian criminologist, who proposed that death penalty should be used as a form of incapacitation and as a form of deterrence. And that person is no other than Cesar Beccaria, the father of the classical school of criminology. In his work, the essay on crime and punishment, he noted that death penalty should be given only for the purpose of incapacitating the offender and deterring future criminals, and as well as the offender. So he provided the systematic use of death penalty and rationalization behind the conduct or behind the imposition of death penalty. So death penalty is no longer practiced after that as some kind of irrational punishment that is being given to anyone who their justice system believes to be punished severely. So although they practiced death penalty at the time, they're only using death penalty for cases that are considered as grave or very serious in nature. Okay? So that's basically the start of the classical school of criminology, wherein death penalty is already considered or used in order to reduce the number of criminality or deter the would-be criminals in committing the crime. Okay? So legally speaking, what does it mean by the word death penalty? I'm not going to discuss further on this, but let us just simply define what death penalty means. So death penalty pertains to the state-sanctioned practice of killing someone as a form of punishment. So this is not form of killing that has no justification behind it. The purpose of death penalty is that it is somewhat a result of of a crime that has been committed. So when a person committed a crime and that crime that he had committed is punishable by death penalty as provided by the laws imposed by the government, then that will be labeled as death penalty. It is also a form of killing. However, it is sanctioned by the government, meaning the government dictates what act should be punished with death penalty and who will be punished with death penalty. So it's a justified death. So we made mention that there are crimes that are being punished by death. So a lot of countries that still practice the imposition of death penalty usually provides death penalty for crimes like, for example, murder, mass murder, aggravated rape, child rape, child sexual abuses, terrorism, war crime, crimes against humanity, genocide, and we have also offenses against the state, including the attempt to overthrow the government, such as, for example, crime of treason, espionage, sedition, piracy, aircraft hijacking, drug trafficking, drug dealing, and drug possession. And also in cases of recidivism, wherein the criminals, after undergoing through rehabilitation process, still did not become a productive member of the community again after being put into the rehabilitation process of the criminal justice system, still became a criminal after that. They are also being put to death. We have also cases of aggravated robbery and kidnapping. So those are the crimes that usually are being punished with death. Okay? So you see that there are changes already. Before, there are some cases or there are some countries that even punishes smoking tobacco by death penalty. Simple acts, like for example stealing candies or stealing, is being punished by death in some other place before the classical period of criminology. So thankfully, we have this criminology who proposes the use of death penalty as a form of irrational type of punishment wherein anyone can be put into death as long as they wanted to put you into death. So these are the changes that are brought by the classical school of criminology. So there are selected crimes only that are being punished with death in many countries in general. So even in our country, we have death penalty during the time of President Marcos. Then here comes 1987 Philippine Constitution, wherein they removed the death penalty, and later on was reimposed by the presidency of Joseph Ejercito Estrada, which was later on being suspended by Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. So we have death penalty existing in our country, but it's not applicable as of now, since it was, or the imposition of it, the practice of death penalty was yet suspended. So even before the death penalty was suspended in our country, usually the crimes that are being punished with death are also the crimes that we made mention. So these are the general crimes that usually are being punished in many countries that still practice the concept of death penalty. Next topic is that we made mention that death penalty usually is for incapacitating the criminals to commit possible crimes in the future. So if we're going to put the person to death penalty, then definitely he can no longer commit additional crimes since he's dead. Correct? Now let's talk about the concept of deterrence, since that is one of the purpose of imposing death penalty, in order to deter criminals or would-be criminals in committing a crime. So if people see that the government, that the law is serious in punishing criminals, then definitely it has the possibility to reduce criminality. Okay, so that's the concept of deterrence. So let us define what is deterrence. Deterrence, in relation to criminal offending, is the idea or a theory that if that threat of punishment will deter people from committing crime and reduce the probability or the level of offending in the society. So basically that's the concept of deterrence. They believe that once there is a strict and serious punishment that are being imposed in a certain country, then people will think twice or think many times before committing an act that is considered to be punishable and considered to be a crime. So that's the basic concept of deterrence. Now the question is, does death penalty serves as a good deterrence? So does it have the capability to deter, to incite fear to people who will be trying to commit a crime in not committing a crime? So again, we go back to the concept of the classical school, where they believe that Beccaria and his colleagues believe that criminals are rational individuals who calculates the pain and the suffering that they will receive from the act before they will commit that certain act. So with that thinking or with that philosophy, the criminals are rational individual, they believe that if we're going to impose penalty, sanctions, or strict or serious punishment to crimes, then definitely it will outweigh the pleasure that the person will receive from a certain act, and will have the tendency to make that person think twice and refrain from committing the crime, because the suffering and pain is much higher than the pleasure that they will receive from the act. So that's the concept of deterrence. Now, if we're going to seriously look into death penalty, if it serves as a good deterrence, then my answer would be yes. Death penalty is a good deterrence. So if a certain crime is punishable by death, rational individual will definitely think twice before committing so, because who would want to lose their life for just a certain amount of money? For example, I'm going to steal an amount of or an item amounting to 1 million pesos. Would that be enough already for me to sacrifice my life for it? Or if a person will rape somebody, would you exchange maybe a minute or an hour of pleasure for your life? So rationally, you would say no, it is not enough, or it does not commensurate with the suffering, with the pain that I'm going to receive after the act. Okay? So definitely, death penalty is a good deterrence. However, the question is, why does the statistic shows that there is no proof that death penalty reduces the criminality in some countries that practices death penalty. So I guess the death penalty is not the problem. I think it's the system that makes the death penalty does not reach the expectation that it should acquire from imposing death penalty. So I think it's the system. Later on, we're going to be talking about more on that. So since we're talking about how will death penalty will be able to deter would-be criminals from committing crimes, maybe the answer is that there is a problem with regards to its implementation. So according to Beccaria and his colleagues, there are requirements for every punishment to be effective as a good deterrence. Is that they must be able to comply with these basic requirements for a punishment to serve as a good deterrence. So what are those requirements? So a punishment must be swift, certain, and severe. Okay? That's basically the requirements for a punishment to be a good deterrence. It must be swift, certain, and severe. So swift means the imposition of punishment must be fast. So if the punishment is served maybe 10 years after the crime has been committed, even if the punishment is severe, if the imposition of penalty is very late in a sense, then I think that that would not be a very effective deterrence. So let's say, for example, in our country. So one crime in our country usually takes how many years before the accused will be sentenced for the crime that he has been committed? So usually it takes more than 10 years sometimes. We have the quotation that says justice delayed is justice denied. See, if the imposition of sentence took how many years, people will not be afraid of committing crime because they know that the justice system in our country is very slow in giving justice. Have you heard any crime that has been decided in just 2 to 3 months or so? I don't know. But if we're going to look into the backlogs of cases by the court pillar, I think there's many of them. So sometimes even a case of rape will take 10 years before a judgment will be laid down by the trial court. So I think that is basically one of the problems that we have in our criminal justice. It's not swift. If you commit a crime today, you will be punished maybe 10 years after the crime has been committed. So for those individuals who have been victimized by a crime, they will be very much disappointed with those types of things that are happening, or with that long time or long period of time before they will receive justice. So I think that's one of the problem. So even if we have that penalty, if the imposition or the sentencing will take 20 years or 10 years or 20 years, then I think that penalty will not be feared. Okay, so that's the first one. So just the first criteria for a good deterrence, the justice system will receive already a failing remarks, since justice system in our country usually takes very long time before a sentence or before a decision will be laid down by the court. So even if we have that penalty in our country, I don't think that it will serve as a good deterrence because of that problem. It's not swift in implementing and in punishing. Next criteria is severe. Okay, so I guess the punishment for crimes committed in our country is definitely severe. We have the capital punishment right now. We have the life imprisonment. We have the reclusion perpetua, which takes 20 years to 40 years as a maximum. So those type of punishment are actually severe. Okay, but this is the problem. The lawmakers should stop thinking that increasing the punishment will definitely make criminals refrain from committing crime, because that is not the case. I think it will go back again to the issue whether are we swift in imposing penalties to those persons who committed the crime. So that's the question. Even if the penalty, the punishment that we have in our laws are very severe, very serious. If we are not swift in giving penalty or punishment to criminals, then definitely it's useless. Okay? But the concept of severity is that the punishment must outweigh the crime that has been committed. And next criteria, or the last criteria for a punishment to be considered as a good deterrence is certain. The certainty. Certainty pertains to the ability of the punishment to punish those individuals who actually committed the crime, regardless of the race, regardless of the social status, or regardless of who he is in the society. So this is sometimes the problem that we are facing, since we know for a fact that there are some injustice that are happening in our country. Usually criminals, especially if they have influence, if they have a good social standing, if they have, lots of money, so if they have those characteristics, they usually are not being punished. So there are injustices that are being encountered by the justice system that we have. I don't know the problem, who is the problem with regards to this. But it appears that if you are a rich person, no matter what crime you committed, you have the less tendency to suffer or to be punished. So I think that is the problem that we have. And that will always go back to the issues on corruption. So in these cases, I don't think that the punishment or the justice system is to be blamed. I think it is those persons who are manning the justice system to be blamed. There's no problem with regards to the justice system that we have. There is a problem to those individuals who are manning the justice system. They usually are being prone to corruption, and that is why only the poor, only the minorities, only those vulnerable members of the society are being punished. So if that is the nature of the punishment, if that is the nature of the death penalty that we have, then I don't think that it will be a good deterrence. And the colleagues and the classical school of thought believers also think the same. So lastly, we're going to be talking about the issues on the imposition of death penalty. Why do people believe that death penalty should not be imposed? Okay, so those are the following. They believe that death penalty is inhumane due to the fact that, of course, biblically speaking, we don't have the authority to take one's life. Death penalty is irreversible. Okay, so we have cases wherein, you are misjudged sometimes, correct? You are being accused of something and being judged of something only to find out that they made mistake in deciding your case. So in ordinary cases, or in you're being convicted of a certain act, you can appeal to the next higher court. But in cases wherein death penalty is being imposed already, even if they will found someday that they made mistake in deciding your case, they can no longer bring back the life of that person. During the early days, they don't have DNA, they don't have scientific means of investigating cases. They convicted and put some individuals to death already. And then later on, as we progresses as a society, we have developed DNA system, we have developed some scientific way of investigation. They revisited those cases and later on found out that there is some mistake in the judgment that they had laid down. So even if they found out that the person who was sentenced to death was actually not guilty, so they can no longer do anything about it, because basically the person is already dead. So that's one also of the issues with regards to this. If they made mistake in deciding your case, even if they correct that thing, they can no longer bring back the life of the person who was accused of the crime. So it's irreversible. And lack of deterrent capacity. This is what the statistics shows. Death penalty lacks the deterrence capacity. It cannot deter criminality. But I made mention that death penalty in general indeed has the capacity, but the problem is if it does not meet the criteria of a good deterrence, then it will not be a good deterrence. Death penalty can deter individuals from committing crime because no life is far more precious than anything else, than any material things. However, if the imposition of this penalty does not meet the criteria, or the expectation from this will not be met. And also, they believe that death penalty discriminates the poor and the minority. We made mention of that. Oftentimes, persons who will be subjected to death penalty or being given death sentence are not actually those who committed the crimes, but rather those poor individuals or the minorities that are being exploited by the governing class or by the members of the society who have the influence and power to reverse or to put someone behind bars in order to protect their own kin. So again, this is not the problem with regards to death penalty, but a problem with regards to individuals who are manning the justice system that we have. Lastly, death penalty encourages culture of violence. Indeed, it encourages culture of violence. But even if we don't have death penalty, I think an incapable justice system will far more encourage culture of violence. Why do we have extrajudicial killing? It is because the justice system that we have is failing. Okay? So those who will not receive justice from the existing justice system that we have will usually seek into putting the law on their own hand or doing extrajudicial killing. So I guess that's the things that we must know with regards to death penalty. So before we shout for the reimposition of death penalty, it is important that we must consider the things that we made mention. If it is really beneficial for us to reimpose that penalty, then I think we should proceed for it. But the question is, are we ready as a country to accept that penalty again? If we have corrupt individual manning the justice system, then I don't think that Philippines should reimpose that penalty. But if we are true to our responsibility and to our words, principles, then I think that penalty will indeed reduce the criminality. Okay, so what do you think of the things that we discussed? Comment down below for your opinion and reaction or questions with regards to the topic that I made mention. That's it for today. See you guys on the next video.